Okay, so I want to finish up a little bit on service. We got through most of service last week as a discipline, but remember that in service we engage our goods and strength in the active promotion of the good of others and the causes of God in our world. And we talk about the fact that the good of others is the primary purpose. And if you go back into the New Testament, you begin to find all kinds of emphasis upon that, upon the others aspect of that. When Paul and Peter, for instance, are speaking about gifts and the nature of the community of faith, they talk about using your gifts or using your talents in service to others, in service to one another. So it's not a matter of simply having an ability and then entertaining oneself with that ability. It's using that ability for the purpose of furthering God's work in the community and others within it. So it's a matter of participating in God's work in the world. So service does that, and we free ourselves from the obligation for approval from others because we're serving Christ in that process. We don't have to worry about what others think about that. Now that means then, though, that we can are free to be engaged in some fairly lowly acts, and it can get messy in the process because life is messy, and so service becomes kind of that coming in to stand in the middle of that mess with people, because the idea is to meet others in the reality of their need. I mean, that's when that's the only time we are blessed anyways. God blesses us where we are rather than withholding a blessing until we shape up. So this sense, so that's a good reminder, not only for us providing service, but when we're receiving it as well. So when people come alongside, can I assist you with this? Can I help you with this? Can I serve you in this moment? And oftentimes we just say, no, I got this. When clearly you don't. And sometimes on the inside you're going, I'm going to say I got this, but I hope you don't believe me, and come alongside anyways. So sometimes we have to let go of that sense of we can manage this thing and just accept that God has placed us in a setting where we can be helped in these times when reality has just beat us up a little bit. And then we experience God's blessing in that process as God sends along that assistance. So Jesus did this, obviously. He modeled this for his disciples at the Last Supper, when he took on the role of washing their feet, rather than assigning that task to somebody else. It's not like he looked around the table and he thought, okay, who's finished? Who's eaten enough? Who's capable of doing that? It's not like he outsourced this idea. He took it upon himself because he saw the need, and so he met it, and it was an act of love in service to them. And so when Jesus says to them, "What you've seen me do, you also do," that didn't necessarily mean we needed to wash each other's feet per se. What we needed to do is just find the point of need in our community, and regardless of what it is, go ahead and meet that for the sake of love. That's all Jesus meant, was don't outsource that. I mean, if you see a need, go ahead and meet it. And sometimes that'll be helping in very lowly ways, and other times it'll be more upfront kind of ways. And both are equally useful and powerful and beneficial and graced. So we have to be able to do those things and respond to them, because we're acting as Christ in those moments, and we are following his lead when we do those things. Now, the act that we do in service doesn't necessarily need to be spiritual. I mean, sometimes we think, if we're using the grace of God in order to provide service to somebody, then it needs to have some kind of spiritual kind of furniture that goes with it, or dressing, that it has to be something like that. But it doesn't have to be what we might categorize as spiritual. It just needs to be an unmet need. In fact, most of the time when we're involved in these acts of service, it likely won't be spiritual in that sense. It is the spirit of the one who's performing the deed that matters, not the task itself. And so the task can be anything. So we're able then to acquire humility in the act of service when we recognize that we're simply imparting the blessing of Christ in the act. Yes, we're providing a need in the moment, we're coming alongside, whether great or small, whatever. But the most important piece of that is that in our coming alongside and providing the service, we are imparting the blessing of Christ as we do that. And subsequently, we also meet Christ in the act. Right?
Sure.
Jesus said that. Inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these, my brethren, you have done it to me. Therefore, we serve with respect, preserving the dignity of the one being served, because we would certainly do that for Jesus. And we serve with love. Now remember that what we're doing is offering something that truly makes a difference in terms of what they really need, rather than what we think they need. And so it takes some listening to figure out, what is that is the true actual need in this moment. In fact, that's the whole basis of Jesus' saying about don't cast your pearls before swine. That doesn't mean there are some people who don't deserve to hear the gospel. That's not what that means. That's how it's often interpreted, but that's not what it means. It simply means pearls can't help hungry swine. If you are needing to feed swine, feed them what they eat. Don't take out your pearls. That's not going to work for them. They will eat you, and pigs will, as a matter of fact. Give them long enough, they will. Because they will eat anything, which is why we don't eat them. But, you may know. We try not to. Different lesson. Go back to the Old Testament for that one. No, that's the whole point. Give people what they need. And then they will have the opportunity to listen to what you have to say, perhaps, in that moment. So make sure that what you're offering is truly what they need. Now, there is just a brief word to the successful that Jesus gives. And it's in Matthew chapter 20. And it's a passage that you are familiar with. You've heard it before. But let's just hear it again for a moment, and then we'll kind of unpack it for a brief minute. Jesus called them, meaning the disciples, together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever is great among you, or whoever wants to be great among you, must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to serve, or to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Does somebody have a NRSV interpretation of that? Let me see if I have that quickly. It's really bad when your Bible app doesn't work in church.
It's that Wi-Fi password issue.
I'm on Wi-Fi. Okay, let's try that. Matthew, what did I say, 20?
NRSV. ESV.
Yeah, it's not looking.
Okay, got it. Matthew which?
Matthew 20, 25 through 28.
Matthew 20, 25 through 28?
Yes.
Scroll. Here we go. 25. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you, but whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and give his life a ransom for many."
Okay, so thank you, Daniel. The comparison that Jesus is making is the successful in the society at the time. So the leaders and lords and so forth. So he's making a comparison of likes in the similarities, and so he's saying, those of you who are great in this community of faith, don't act like they're great in this culture, okay? In this your contemporary culture, because these people lord it over there and they're interested in dominion, but the great here have a different value and approach to this. And so this really isn't necessarily a formula for how to become great. This is a formula or this is a word of advice to those who already are. Those who are already recognized as perhaps in leadership or mature or somebody to exercise some level of responsibility within the community of faith. It says, if you are in that position, then this is your approach here. Not to exercise dominion over others, but to serve them. And that is the proper role for this person in the church. Oh, now it says, yeah. Thank you very much. So the idea is simply that Jesus is, again, speaking about like the upside down kingdom idea, that the things that are acceptable or seen as norm in society are actually very different in the kingdom. And so those of you who are in those positions consider it an opportunity to serve. And it's a posture to adopt so that you can make the most of that moment with the kind of resources that you have available to you. And it can be very difficult to be like that in the community of faith. It can still be very difficult to do that. But Jesus says this is the way to do that. So let me ask you, let me just suggest some practical applications here in service so that we can move on into our topic for today, because we're still just catching up from last week, right? So the practical applications, what are those when it comes to service? Well, obviously there are service opportunities at church. There's no lack of those. We see them in the announcements all the time. If you want to participate in this particular area, then do that. And I think it's great that the church does have service opportunities for people to be engaged in and just doesn't hire everything done. There are some things that you unfortunately have to do that with, but it's great to have opportunities for people to be engaged and use their gifts and abilities and passions that God has given them. Things like working down at the food bank in town, that's an active service that fulfills this kind of need. Doing a shift at the shelter for those experiencing homelessness, that's a great way of serving other people, and that will really teach you it'll give you some challenges in terms of your own attitudes. And you will find some interesting things that happen to you as you compare or so forth. There was a time when I was once going to, I think I was doing report. That's what it was. This was for a school project at university. So I was doing a report on a homeless shelter in the town in which I lived at the time. And so I'd already made plans to meet with the director of this particular mission outreach. But I wanted to see, what was it like from the receiver's end of it, rather than an observer just looking and hearing from this. So I thought, well, let me just kind of go as a participant and just see it from that side and so forth. And one of the first clues that I had really totally screwed this up was like right after I got in line, the keys on my belt began to jangle. And the guy, next to me said, "You're not really one of us, are you?" I was like, "I guess I'm not. None of them have car keys." And I thought, what an idiot, But, so that didn't work too well. But it was an interesting observation for me to say, okay, things I take for granted aren't, normal in their world. We had done shifts at overnight shelters for homeless people, and some of you I'm sure have too. And it's very interesting to see the dynamics that are going on there and what that does in shaping your own spirit in that moment. Teaching others a needed skill. I like this is what Jason Lockwood is planning on doing in retirement, is teaching people, young people who perhaps didn't have that kind of instruction from their parent, perhaps, and they need to acquire a skill in order to either make it in the world or just kind of take care of themselves. I wish I'd had a guy like Jason when I was in that place as a young adult. My dad was not one of those people. My dad was a hire it done kind of guy, so he didn't have time to go out and screw around with things like that. He just hired it done. So as a result, I never learned how to do anything except look up people in the phone book for when you needed something done. That's what I learned how to do. But he also had a level of income that was different from mine at that point, and so I couldn't really take advantage of that. So I wish I'd had somebody like Jason at that time. A great opportunity. Reading to kids at a local school, that's a great way of serving. Providing childcare when someone faces crisis. Let me come in and help you this morning. Serving through a parachurch ministry, that's a great way to be of service. There's a place down in more South Seattle area, it's called the Genesis Project, and it's an outreach to the local sex workers kind of trade that takes place on Aurora Avenue down there. What's different about this is that it was begun by vice detectives who were Christians and said, just throwing these people in jail is not solving the problem. And the people that we arrest are not the perpetrators of the system that's creating this problem. And so they got together and created this outreach that offers assistance to these women and helps them get reestablished in life, in community, and gets them out of that cycle of dependence. And so they've been operating down there for, almost a decade now in doing that. And they have a crisis center that is staffed around the clock, and they have volunteers that come in to help and all of that. It's a completely volunteer program, but it's a ministry in the name of Christ to these people who are in there. So a lot of people are able to just serve in that way and know that they're imparting a blessing of Christ. So that's a messy kind of ministry, because these people have messed up lives typically, and just because they're rescued from them doesn't mean that all their problems are solved. That's where a new set of problems kind of gets introduced, and so this is helping them navigate that new set of problems. Knitting goods for hospital patients, prayer shawls for people in crisis. Those are ways of service. Visitation to the imprisoned, that's a way of serving other people. Even a beach cleanup day, that's a way of service too. Just because you're not at church cleaning up the grounds doesn't mean it isn't a ministry of Christ, right? You're caring for creation. Interesting, I have been reading, so this is the type of weird person that I am. For my devotional reading, I'm reading through the Romans commentary by N.T. Wright, just because I happen to appreciate Wright's perspective and take on things, but I also appreciate the fact that he's very, 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 very specific in the things that he says. And he will not make a statement until he has told you what everybody else who has commented on this has to say about it. And then he'll tell you why his understanding is preferable to everybody else. Although there are people that he agrees with, but there's just as many people that he disagrees with. But it's very, very deep. And there's this particular passage in this section in Romans that I've just been on my mind. So I've just been reading through that and enjoying it. One of the things that came across this section in Romans that I'm reading right now talks about, Wright makes the point that what Paul helps us to see is that the Holy Land is no longer just Israel where Jesus walked in that day. The Holy Land in the resurrection of Christ is the whole world. The whole world is the Holy Land. And so wherever you are serving Christ, and wherever you are, you can meet Christ. And a lot of people, go over there and have this. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Particularly, I don't want the church's trip in October to suffer as a result of this. So if you're already committed to going, go, okay? But what I'm saying, and what Wright makes the point, is that in the resurrection of Christ, the whole world has become the Holy Land. And so when you're out doing a beach cleanup or a stream cleanup or something like that, you are working in the Holy Land. This is creation over which we've been given responsibility, and so that's equally important. Yard cleanup for the infirm or seniors, and if you really have passion for that, you can come to my house, and I can help you serve Christ in that way. Disaster relief is a great way to do that. Mission trips are a great way to do this, to be engaged in serving. And oftentimes I think that the impact of mission trips has more to do with the people who go on them than what they actually accomplish in the time that they're there. There are times when people do accomplish some great things on mission trips, where they build buildings and that kind of thing, and it's been very helpful and useful. And of course, down at the clinic in Jogale, that's important to be involved in the development of that property and the work of those people. That's a different kind of relationship because you've been there for a long time. So these people. This is like family getting together. But oftentimes you do this kind of hit and miss kind of mission trip where people go down and build a house for somebody and then they're gone. Next time they come down, it's like way over the other side of the city. There's no ongoing relationship. But the value of the mission trip is what happens with the people who are there and what they understand and perceive about their own place. I was on a trip once with a guy who was a general contractor at home, and so he's used to running the whole show. And we went down there to help build a church building for people in kind of a poor indigenous area. And so we came with all of our equipment, cement mixers, levels, and shooting laser kind of things and so forth, and all the technical stuff that actually runs on electricity, which they didn't have available, down there. So we're thinking, well, why are the nearest Home Depot where we can get a generator kind of thing and so forth. So it was kind of like this group of burly construction guys. We're going to come here and do this thing. In the meantime, the guy who has been in charge of this project, which is about halfway done, who has nothing electronic at all at his disposal. He's just got lines and stuff. So he's just standing there going, so you guys are going to come take over for 10 days, right? Well, so the general contractor guy, while we've been, making lists about what we need to get from the local Casa Depot, they're talking, and the our guy goes around the building and the foundations, insides, and with the local guy. And our guy has his level and he has his square and all that stuff. And he's checking things out. And after about a 20-minute survey or 30-minute survey about the guy, our guy comes back and says, just throw your list away. We're not using any of this stuff. We're going to listen to him. This building is as plumb and square as anything I've ever been. He knows what he's doing. So we did. We just put all that stuff aside. We just said, what do you want us to do? And so he told us, and we just participated with them in building the building. We didn't come over and do it. When, was it when we left? I think it was when we left. The local guy, for some reason couldn't be at the service that we had the night before. So he traveled to the airport just to say goodbye to our guy, our general contractor. And they built a friendship. The point being, I think it was very encouraging for the people down there to have us come and say, what can we do to help you accomplish what you want to do here? Rather than us come down and say, we're going to do this for you. And I think it made a big difference. And made a difference for us too, in terms of that. So mission trips are valuable for a lot of things besides just building buildings or doing VBS. Offering assistance to a neighbor who's tackling a large project. Sometimes people are fearful of asking for help, but if you offer your help, maybe you can be involved. The point of service, simply this, 1 Corinthians 15:58, Paul says, always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord. And remember, anytime we're engaged in this kind of act of service, we're working for the Lord. Always give yourself fully, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. It's making an impact. And there may be, it'll live into the future of what God is doing. Okay, so service as a discipline, if you include these moments in your life on a regular basis, then you draw near to the God who both empowers your actions and meets you in them as well. If we just simply wait for opportunities to arise, it could be a long time between opportunities. So that's where the discipline aspect comes in, when you plan to do these things as they go. All right. How much time do we have? Oh, plenty of time. Let's move into the discipline of prayer. Is that all right with you? Okay. Let's do that. So prayer, in essence, is simply conversation with God on matters of mutual concern. That's all prayer is. Conversation with God on matters of mutual concern. And since God is interested in every facet of our lives, there is nothing that cannot qualify as a concern in prayer. There is nothing about your life that you cannot pray about. On the other hand, and here's what I want you to see, we will find ourselves drawn deeper into the life of God when our life of prayer includes matters of concern to God. When we limit our prayer to simply what I want to tell you, and then it's see you later, we go only so far. It's like the joke of the guy or gal on a date who spends the whole time talking about themselves and then says, but enough, I've been doing too much talking. What do you think about me? So that still is a one-sided conversation, right? And sometimes that's what our prayer lives are like. We've spent all this time telling God what we think God needs to know. When in fact, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, God, your Father already knows exactly what you need. And I think we forget that sometimes. But it is God who already knows what we need. And so that has to condition our prayer life a little bit. And what we want to understand is that this is a conversation. This is not a monologue. It's a conversation with God. And it will get better and deeper and richer and more meaningful when it includes those matters that are of concern to God. What are those matters? We'll get to those in a little bit. So, as an approach to this topic of prayer, then it would be a shame if we reduced this topic to a mere discipline. To say, just treat prayer as a discipline like everything else. There's so much more to be gained with prayer in our life of faith than simply a schedule with prayer consigned to a list. There are people that treat prayer that way, certain times. And I'm not saying that isn't useful. In fact, I recommend it later on at the end, but with certain conditions. The idea is not simply to get into a regimen as, I have to say this prayer now, let me pull it out, read it, okay, we're done. That's not what we're talking about here. Making plans in prayer can also shape our life of faith. You can incorporate some of these things, and it could be establishing a rhythm to your life. And so prayer can frame the contours of your day, but you shouldn't treat the content of your prayer as simply a discipline that you have to get through. I have to be here, so what do you want? Think of it as a conversation. Remember that in this portion of our study, I don't have the board, it's hiding behind the screen today. We talk about the disciplines of abstinence, and now we're talking about the disciplines of engagement. Abstinence are the things we take away from our life to draw near to God, but engagement are the things that we include in our life to draw nearer to God. So prayer is a discipline of engagement, and we're looking for ways to intentionally include God in our life. The fact is, God is always present to us. Always. There is never a time when God is not present to us. But we're not always equally present to God, and that's what we're trying to do in this kind of study, is to condition ourselves, to train ourselves to be present to God. God is always present to us. Let's return the favor. So one objective useful in this topic of prayer is to aim for a conversational relationship with God. So aim for a consciousness that remains aware of companionship, that you recognize that you are always in the presence of God at all times. God is a constant in our thought. So this can fill our conversation then with God, with feelings, with thoughts, with desires, with reactions, with prompts, with delight, sorrow, confusion, direction, purpose. You begin to get the idea that there is hardly anything that is outside of the purview of that kind of a thing. And when you develop that consciousness, that awareness of being in the presence of God, then you express your feelings freely and you contemplate your desires easily with God, and you observe things with God, like, what do you think about this? Or you begin to develop this sense of not what do I think about this, but what do you think about this in the larger picture. And it can also create the sense that we get to the place where we develop that sense that we're never alone, even if no one else is around. That we're never alone in that situation. But more importantly, that God is present in our challenging moments, or when we are with other people. Sometimes it's easier for people to get the sense that I'm with God when they're all by themselves and nothing to distract them. That's wonderful, and we want to encourage that. But also bring that sense back into like when you go to a social function, or you go to a party, or you're in the midst of your work environment, remember that God is also there with you in those times. God didn't just kind of stay at the door or stay home, have a nice day. God is with you in those moments. Hopefully that's a pleasant thought. And we don't have to say, gosh, I hope you don't really see this doing, and God is like, too late. But what that can really do when you have this sense is that it can create great confidence in God's strength and energy. You know, this mantra that seems to be going around in our society right now, particularly in reaction to gun violence, and the evangelical community, or the church community response in general, is being basically derided. And people are saying, okay, we're done with thoughts and prayers. Because in their minds, thoughts and prayers are what?
Not really doing anything.
Not really doing anything. It's useless. Useless. And perhaps in the way they're thinking about that, and if that's in fact the way we're praying, maybe it is somewhat useless if we're only simply saying, God, I want you to kind of be present to the families that are there. I mean, it helps with the people who are engaged in the immediate program, but what about the larger structural picture of sin that allows this to continue in our world and in our society? How are we praying about that with God? This is a matter of mutual concern. God is as concerned about this as we are. So are we having the conversation with God to say, what can we do about this? Well, how can we approach this in a way that will make sense? How can we do this in a way that will actually address the problem in a way that makes a difference? And how can you lead that idea? And we begin to go back and forth with God on those things. Do you think that somebody who has spent a great deal of time in prayer about how can we approach this from a systemic way that makes sense to the people involved, when that person has a firm sense that God has led in the development of that idea, do you think they're going to be timid about that? I mean, they can be if they're afraid of being in a crowd, but I mean, the idea is when you have a sense that God has delivered and is there, you have great boldness in that and can go forward with great courage in that moment. That is what prompted David in the face of Goliath, right? Here's the scrawny little shepherd kid, he's scrawny in comparison to Goliath. Your shepherds, he says, I wrestled a bear and a lion. So, you don't do that without doing a bit of CrossFit to get to that place. So he probably wasn't scrawny, but compared to Goliath, if you were taking odds, who would you have bet on? Particularly when he comes out with the slingshot and Goliath has all these massive weapons of destruction and so forth. But David doesn't even appear timid in that moment, does he? When he comes in, he says, I come against you in the name of the God of Israel, whom you have what? Dishonored. And so in other words, you are history, dude. And he has absolutely no qualms about being in that situation. So people say, well, then why did he have 5 stones? Well, don't put the Lord your God to a test. Miss with the first one, God, just try it. Yeah. Evidently it didn't happen. David was pretty good with that stuff. But I mean, that's what I'm saying. David's courage didn't come out of a pep talk from Saul. In fact, that had the opposite effect on him. It came out of his knowledge of his conversation with God. Well, how do we know David had that conversation? Have you read the Psalms? That's the kind of person we're talking about. Is this person who discloses everything. David wears his faith on his sleeve when it comes to his relationship with God. He's not holding anything back. And so he has this great confidence of being in God's presence with God's strength and energy. And you and I can have that same sense of confidence when we have spent time intelligently conversing with God about matters of mutual concern, and God has opened up a pathway, opened up a thought process, engaged perhaps other people in that for us, and we now have a plan that is bathed in prayer and can go forth with the confidence that God will help us see it through. And we may not live long enough to see the effect of it happen, but we can get the ball rolling in that process. So thoughts and prayers, can be a source of great courage if we pray intelligently. So,
I have a comment.
yeah, you run in time because it says, as we consider it from this angle, I'm curious to know your own practices or challenges with prayer. So there you go.
It's well, the challenge I've had out of my own personal experience is sometimes I've thought it was God's will, but it really was more my will. So I thought I was carrying forward what I thought was on the service or the ministry, and it turned out it really wasn't. It was more about me. But I didn't find that out till after it failed. But then God led me in a different direction that used the same skill set, but it was like a natural thing that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
but that happens in our world a lot, I think.
Well, it happens in relationships too, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
you can do something for somebody else that's really, not really what they want is what you want, kind of thing. But as you get to know one another, then that changes.
And sometimes we think the intention is the serving a need that God has put on our heart. It can be confusing. You have to be able to have a prayer life, like you said, a conversational prayer life where I found, where you sit and wait, be patient, and allow God to show me is what I found, rather than pursuing and having goals
Yeah.
and making it happen, which is our culture. And it's humility. The word is humility. It's,
Listening to God. Right.
yeah.
Good. Thanks. Yes.
Yeah, on the aspect of mission trips, of course, you got plans when the church knitted these dolls and stuff, and they were going to distribute them. And so my plan was to take pictures while they're giving out the dolls, right?
Yeah.
But the little kid that had never even seen a frisbee before, that was playing catch with me and was afraid of it at first, once he caught on, when I went over to take the pictures, he came over and pulled on my, I want to throw the frisbee.
Yeah.
And so that said, God is speaking to me because, this kid has never even seen a frisbee.
Yeah.
So it gives you a little bit of where they're coming from, but it also shows that that's not important. There will be lots of people taking pictures.
The kid is important.
Yeah. It was wonderful. That experience with kids down in Guatemala for me was,
Well, it's nice of you and helpful for you to be attentive to what God, to your sense of this is God, prompting,
Well,
this.
I love your story about the general contractor because he could have been still on a pedestal and directing, but he stepped down off of it and met as an equal with
Yeah.
someone else and listened and
Yeah.
well, and saw the work that the guy did.
Yeah.
You respected, hey, he's doing all this stuff without this technology.
Yeah. Let's do it his way. Yeah. What are some of your other experiences with prayer?
You sometimes take what you're struggling with and you think you have to do it, like I'm trying to learn to play the piano. And it is not my nature as an engineer to have a left brain and a right brain that can play this and this at the same time. And I've never thought of it as asking God, can you help me with this? It's always been about,
Yeah.
so it's the motivation of learning to say, maybe I've been going about this all the wrong way or something, but to help, have him help me with that. So, that just came to mind when we were talking.
I read somewhere that you don't, with the suggestion was you don't pray for yourself, meaning I, unless it's, what would you have me do, Lord, to further, to deal with this situation? What would you have me do?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, when we think about prayer, there's some misconceptions that I want to kind of clear away. so that they don't come in and block us in our time of, oh, wait a minute, it's 9:47. I didn't set my alarm, so I was ignoring. So now,
You must have something important.
this is a good place to stop, so we'll pick that up next time. So remind me that it's clearing away misconceptions. And so you'll just have to live with misconceptions for another week. And then we'll clear them away next week. Hey, thank you for your time. Let's go and enjoy celebrating God's goodness.